La Hammer restera dans les mémoires comme la société de production la plus florissante de l'histoire du cinéma britannique. Dans ses bureaux de Wardour Street, siège de l'industrie cinématographique londonienne, et dans son studio situé près du château de Windsor, sur les rives de la Tamise, ont été produits et réalisés des films qui ont fait le tour du monde. La Hammer orchestra de grands films d'aventure, tels que L'attaque de San Cristobal, de sombres films de guerre, comme Section d'assaut sur le Sitang, ainsi que des intrigues policières, des films à suspense, des comédies, des documentaires et des films dramatiques.
Néanmoins, pour le grand public, le nom de Hammer évoque surtout des films d'horreur et de science-fiction. À l'instar des comédies du studio britannique Ealing, des dessins animés de Walt Disney et des westerns de la compagnie République, les films d'épouvante de la Hammer possédaient un style inimitable. Servis par des scénarios bien ficelés et des effets visuels novateurs, la compagnie Hammer se forgea une réputation dans l'industrie cinématographique mondiale en exploitant les thèmes les plus primaires qui soient: la sexualité et la violence, la chair et le sang.
Le succès de la Hammer reposait non seulement sur le sang, mais aussi sur les liens du sang. Les membres de la direction avaient entre eux des liens de parenté. Une ambiance familiale régnait également sur les plateaux, entre les acteurs, les réalisateurs, les techniciens et les cuisiniers. Home Video a remis à l'honneur les productions de la Hammer, qui sont aujourd'hui considérées comme de grands classiques. Les bandes originales et les livres d'époque consacrés à cette période cinématographique sont devenus des objets de collection très prisés. Les affiches de ces longs métrages, jadis offertes aux salles de cinéma, se vendent aujourd'hui à prix d'or. Un album regroupant des musiques de films de la Hammer, édité par Silver Screen Records, a pulvérisé des records de vente dès sa sortie au Royaume-Uni, aux États-Unis et en Europe.
Pourquoi ces films inspirent-ils un tel engouement teinté de nostalgie? Et pourquoi le rayonnement international de cette compagnie a-t-il faibli au bout de 20 ans comme un vampire dès les premières lueurs du jour? Le renouveau du style gothique qui caractérisait les productions Hammer était à la fois révolutionnaire et traditionnel. Ce subtil mélange d'érotisme et de surnaturel était apparu dans la littérature anglaise dès le XVIIIe siècle. Mary Shelley, créatrice de Frankenstein, et Bram Stoker, auteur de Dracula, s'inscrivaient dans cette tradition. Des adaptations théâtrales de romans tels que Dr. Jekyll et Mr. Hyde de Stevenson firent frémir les spectateurs de part et d'autre de l'Atlantique. Les romans de gare à sensation, regorgeant de détails terrifiants, exploitaient eux aussi le filon du surnaturel. Quelques-uns des premiers films muets furent également placés sous le signe de l'épouvante. On se souvient notamment de Nosferatu, la première version de Dracula. Les images de ce chef-d'œuvre, dépourvues de dialogue, marquèrent les esprits des cinéphiles du monde entier.
L'avènement du parlant révolutionna l'industrie cinématographique mondiale. À l'instar de la Tour de Babel, les films résonnaient désormais d'une myriade de voix discordantes.
La violence visuelle était taboue. Les cow-boys des westerns avaient parfois le corps criblé de balles, mais on ne les voyait jamais saigner.
Les grands studios hollywoodiens régnaient sur le marché mondial. Leurs films mettaient à l'honneur de grandes stars qui emportaient l'adhésion du public.
It originated as a very small distribution company under the title Exclusive Films. The people concerned then were my grandfather, Enrique Carreras, from Spain, and a man called Will Hammer, or Hines, depending on how you knew him as to whether it was in his private life or he had a sort of theatrical life.
Hammer was my father, surprisingly enough. He was a successful businessman and a failed comedian. He failed because he wasn't really very funny.
Après avoir créé une compagnie baptisée Hammer en souvenir du nom de scène de Will Hines, ces deux hommes produisirent quelques films dont une comédie musicale ayant pour vedette le chanteur américain Paul Robeson. Le hasard voulut que l'une de ses toutes premières productions donna un rôle à Bela Lugosi, star du film hollywoodien Dracula.
I joined, we're very close as we sit here today, to being 50 years when I first reported for work as an office boy in Wardour Street. During the period, may I tell you, when doodlebugs were dropping on London at that time. So it was an exciting start. Well, then I had to go off and do national service. By the time I came back, my father had joined the company.
Jimmy Carreras was the most wonderful salesman I have ever met. Full of charm, knew exactly what he wanted, but charmed you out of it if it was not what you wanted.
And he took this small company and increased it in its size and put on a sales force. And Exclusive did actually become quite a small entity within the British film industry at the time of the quota quickies.
Afin de protéger la production cinématographique nationale, le Parlement britannique institua un système de quotas qui profita au colonel James Carreras.
But you see, Jimmy Carreras and Mike Carreras never got on. There was a great schism between them.
My father was a businessman, a salesman. He wasn't a filmmaker. I mean, there was no collision, but there was no meeting of the minds either.
Le fils de Will Hines, Tony, supervisait les activités de production aux côtés de Michael Carreras, mais son ambition inavouée était l'écriture.
After the war, Enrique's son, Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carreras, came back, and we seemed to get on right. And he said, "Why didn't I join?" And I'd just come out of the Air Force, and I really hadn't anything to do. So we got together, and I joined the firm.
Tony Hines was a better filmmaker than I was. He was, a definitive filmmaker. Tony only lived to make films.
We became quite friendly, which is most unusual, as Tony never became friendly with anybody involved in movies. We became quite friendly.
We very luckily got hold of the rights and were encouraged to make a film by the booking manager of the ABC cinemas, which turned out to be Dick Barton, which was a tremendous successful radio series and really was a national institution. We started to make a series of radio-orientated characters and bringing them to life in the cinemas. From 1948, we actually had a production program of 6 pictures a year, all based on the radio series. And from that, slowly, whatever the company policies were in changing names, but Exclusive segued into Hammer Films.
Les Bray Studios furent installés dans un manoir situé au bord de la Tamise.
And a lot of it was kind of falling apart and, needed repair. And I remember once there was a terrible thunderstorm. Oh, God, the rain came down in sheets, as it can, as you know there. And the roof's leaking, everything's leaking. And Terry Fisher says, carry on. And there we are, the splash, donk, going everywhere. But we carried on.
La Hammer confia la gestion des Bray Studios à Anthony Nelson Keyes. Il allait par la suite devenir producteur, tout comme son jeune assistant, Jimmy Sangster.
I would work for Hammer ever since came out of the forces, which was when I was about 20. And I worked with them constantly. We'd work from 8:30 to 5:30 on Wednesdays and Fridays and to 6 o'clock on the other 3 days. And they were very strict about breaking up on time.
As executive producer, used to cut the turkey at Christmas, it was a really small family, permanent unit. Our crew used to, I think probably 3 years was like a minimum engagement when they used to join Hammer in those days. We had the same directors alternating, and the producers were Tony Hines and myself. Certain types of films that he enjoyed making, I didn't, and certain types of films I liked making, he didn't. But the studio only made one film at a time, and that is a tremendous advantage in not only everybody knowing everybody, but everybody knew what the hell they were doing. They were all working on the same film, and the Americans adored this.
À l'époque, la Hammer ne réalisait que de petites productions. Le partenariat avec Robert Lippert lui garantissait une large distribution aux États-Unis, un accroissement des bénéfices et la possibilité d'utiliser des prises de vue d'autres films de Lippert. Mais au début des années 50, la Hammer ne se distinguait en rien des autres sociétés de production.
They were not even on their way to becoming a cult then.
La Hammer tire à profit de l'engouement naissant pour la télévision en adaptant une série de la BBC. Le X majuscule, qui composait la première lettre de son titre, indiquait clairement que ce film n'était pas destiné aux enfants.
We were off on our way to Tangier, and we were leaving the airport, and Tony Hines raced up in a car, and just before we got on the plane, he put a whole bundle of television scripts in my hand and said, "Read these in Tangier, we want to make a film of them." I said to Tony Hines, I would like to do this as a documentary, and I'd like to shoot at cinema, verite, handheld cameras, all that. And he said, okay, do it.
Ce film, intitulé The Creeping Unknown ou The Quatermass Experiment, sorti sur les écrans français sous le titre Le Monstre.
3 men went into outer space. Only one of them came back. Came back a strange, distorted creature, haunted and possessed by something beyond human understanding.
Lippert imposa à la production l'acteur américain Brian Donlevy pour interpréter le rôle du héros, le professeur Bernard Quatermass.
Unlock his mind for me, Briscoe, and find it. I know you can do it.
It isn't just a
I know the strain and tension you've been under, but to stop now when we're so close.
These were stories with a very dynamic hero who was a no-nonsense kind of scientist who let nothing stand in his way and was actually kind of ruthless in his way, which was a really interesting protagonist for a picture. Usually the protagonists in pictures, these people were the villains in American pictures.
You've destroyed him like you've destroyed everything else you've touched.
There's no room for personal feelings in science, Judith.
I want to cordon around the entire area, evacuate all public, get information to check up every movement that's likely to take place inside this radius tonight.
And it was then that I started to work with John Hollingsworth, who was already the music director of Hammer. When he played the tapes to Tony Hines, who said, okay, let's try. And so there I was, suddenly flung into the Quatermass Experiment. Very alarming it was, too, the first time round. It was scored, I think, entirely for strings and percussion. It seemed to suit the subject very well.
The special effects fellow that we had, Les Bowie, who did miracles for nothing. Always complaining, always saying, how can I do this? It's impossible. Always came up with it. And that monster was, in fact, a piece of tripe.
Jouant une fois de plus sur la lettre X qui s'applique en Grande-Bretagne au film interdit au jeune public, Hammer produisit X The Unknown, thriller sur une boue radioactive noire remontant des entrailles de la Terre.
It was Tony Hines and Mike Carreras, and we were batting around ideas, and it seemed at the end of a session I'd come up with the most ideas, so Tony Hines said, go away and write it. I said, I'm not a writer, I'm a production manager. And he said, well, write it, if we like it, we'll buy it. So I wrote it, and he liked it, and he bought it.
And posters were the great sale. They used to go over with most elaborate artwork posters. But I remember him once telling an executive that we wanted to do a picture about the Yeti, and the man became most interested in what the Yeti would look like, and Jimmy said to him, we don't know, we haven't caught one yet.
Tandis que les décorateurs transformaient le manoir des Bray Studios en un temple tibétain, l'équipe de tournage partit filmer quelques scènes d'action dans les Pyrénées françaises.
We had what was laughingly called a crash course in skiing. We had 2 days of it, that's all, bottom before all went up and hung on by our teeth.
Au fil des années, Forrest Tucker renforça ses liens avec la Hammer.
They know it was me. Steve, wait. Ed, I can hear you. Hey, come, you got
Shelley, it isn't anybody. I can hear his voice. It's in your own mind. It's just happened to me, too.
A great guy, and a great guy with props. He works out overnight every single prop and thing that he can use, never tells anybody, and it comes out during the scene. So he became known as Props Pete.
We dare you to see the abominable snowman of the Himalayas.
What we tried desperately to do is we all said we must never, ever see that Yeti. You can see pieces of him, bits, an arm, of an eye, of thing, and let people build their own vision of him.
Nigel Neal adapta la suite de la série de la BBC sous le titre Quatermass 2 ou La Marque. Le futur réalisateur, Brian Forbes, y jouait l'une des victimes d'une invasion d'extraterrestres. Seul le professeur Quatermass soupçonnait que la nourriture synthétique préparée dans une usine secrète n'était pas destinée à la consommation humaine. Nigel Neal reprochait à Don Levy d'être trop bourru, trop brutal, trop américain.
Vincent Broadhead is dead. Dead? I watched him die a few hours ago in that plant. His whole body covered with some kind of corrosive poisoning, eaten away.
Mais naturellement, le réalisateur défendit son acteur principal.
Now, with that sort of a thing, a down-to-earth, prosaic, honest-to-God man like Brian Levy was an enormous help.
That pipe has been blocked with human pulp. No, this is not filthy murder.
What's in those doors, mister?
Yes, what is it? Tell us. Inside those domes are creatures from outside this earth.
Ah, you're mad.
I've seen them. Thousands of tiny creatures that can join together and expand into things 100 feet high.
La Hammer mit plus de 10 ans à monter Quatermass and the Pit, ou Les Monstres de l'espace, diffusé à la télévision en 1958. Finalement, Andrew Kerr reprit le rôle de Quatermass sous la direction de Roy Ward Baker.
I read it and I thought it was absolutely marvellous. It was a really fireproof script. It was excellent. The film was meant to be made at Elstree Studios, and they suddenly said, sorry, we have no space. But just up the road was the old Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer studio, and they were only too delighted because their studio was empty. So we had the whole place to ourselves. So it was very lucky, and an enormous back lot, which we built the exterior of the underground station.
En creusant, des savants découvrent un vaisseau spatial d'origine inconnue et les restes en décomposition d'insectes géants. Quatermass en déduit que les extraterrestres ont réussi par leur technologie à pénétrer l'esprit des êtres humains et à les programmer pour qu'ils débarrassent la société de tous les éléments séditieux.
Despite the fact that I didn't get on with Roy and I was a bit tricky with other people, but we gelled as a unit, you know, as a group of actors.
I wanted to kill you.
Why?
Because you are different.
I thought that some of the scenes were uneven.
It's Barbara. She's the one.
My duty now is to quieten public alarm.
And you keep your damn paws out of things.
It's still a remarkable picture. It was an idea movie, and that was really unusual.
Le film sortit la même année que 2001 l'Odyssée de l'espace et il s'inscrivit parfaitement dans la lignée des productions fantastiques orchestrées par la Hammer. En 1950, les monstres classiques étaient utilisés à des fins comiques.
In the 50s, when the genre was basically in decline, the horror movies had sunk pretty low. And when the Hammer pictures came along, they were obviously classier.
Max Rosenberg et Milton Subotsky proposèrent à la Hammer un scénario de Frankenstein.
It didn't bear much relationship to the film that we finally made. They had the ear of Elliot Hyman, I think I'm correct in saying, and Elliot, by this time we were now associated with Elliot, but he, because he didn't know much about it either, thought that was a good idea in making, because there hadn't been a Gothic horror made since the Universal cycle, and certainly not in colour. And so he really sent the script over. Tony looked at it and said, no, we can't do this. It just wasn't good enough.
And I'm given a script, which I didn't really like. It's rather boring, and it's a sort of rehash of the old. But anyway, we were going to do it.
Ce film devait être tourné en noir et blanc, à moindre frais, avec Boris Karloff dans le rôle du baron. Mais les producteurs de la Hammer apprirent qu'il serait poursuivi en justice s'il reprenait des éléments des versions précédentes de Frankenstein.
So we had to make a film that was entirely different from the first one. Well, then it became fun.
Ils mirent au point une version en couleur totalement différente. Jack Asher se vit confier la réalisation des prises de vue et Jimmy Sangster remania entièrement le scénario.
I'm not sure. I don't think so. I don't think I read it. I just seen all the old Frankenstein movies. The only problem with Universal was they had a copyright on the monster. We couldn't use the idea of the Boris Karloff type monster with the bolts through his neck. We couldn't do that. That was the only problem. I mean, Frankenstein was public domain. That's why we came up with a different one, different design.
Terence Fisher avait réalisé des épisodes de Robin des Bois pour la télévision, ainsi qu'un film à suspense intitulé So Long de Fer, qui avait été salué par Hitchcock lui-même.
Ah, it was lovely. He was such fun. He always knew exactly what he wanted, and that's why the films were made fast, and the way they were.
Quiet, didn't have a lot to say. Knew what he was doing. He was an old-time pro.
Peter Cushing eut la chance que l'émission de la BBC dans laquelle il jouait s'interrompe momentanément. Il put reprendre le rôle interprété par Colin Clive dans le film original de 1931.
We've discovered the source of life itself, and we've used it to restore a creature that was dead.
We never make our films with tongue-in-cheek. Having played so many of the period doctors, I always go to my doctor to ask, how do you take a brain now to do anything? Because I think that you must do it all correctly.
I can't prove you murdered, but I can stop you using his brain.
Why? He has no further use for it? Don't be a fool! Be careful! You damage it!
Pour achever le film, la Hammer dut vendre un long métrage à la Warner. Cette opération lui rapporta environ 660 000 francs, ce qui lui permit tout juste de boucler le budget. Christopher Lee donna une nouvelle interprétation du monstre légendaire.
The legs are independent of the arms. The hands sort of don't coordinate with the feet or the rest of the body. So I tried to play the character like an ill-coordinated, childish creature.
Le premier jour où Peter Cushing rencontra Christopher Lee, il lui dit qu'il était déçu de ne pas avoir de réplique. Cushing lui répondit « Écoute, j'ai lu le scénario et honnêtement, tu peux t'estimer heureux. »
Oh. Well, we were shooting in the dark. We really were. I did about 3 tests, if I remember right. I think I said, look, it's bits and pieces of other people, so it should be patched together.
Le maquilleur Phil Leakey créa un visage qui rappelait celui d'un accidenté de la route. Cette créature était un véritable patchwork de balafre. Il était pratiquement impossible à Christopher Lee de boire ou de manger, et naturellement, il avait le plus grand mal à trouver des voisins de table.
It's never horrific to you. Well, in fact, we might have laughed. Probably did.
I guess I was 10 or 11. Oh, it was terrifying. I mean, I was scared to death. I've always heard the makeup criticized in later years as not being a very good makeup. I thought it was pretty creepy.
What is amazing today to me is the production value, the beauty of the sets, the costumes. They were all real. They were all Victorian costumes.
Elizabeth, come back!
Les yeux, les mains et les organes du monstre étaient emplis d'un liquide de couleur rouge carmin qui fit hurler de douleur Christopher Lee dans une scène où on lui tira sur le visage.
When this happened, I gave vent to the most ear-splitting shriek, which literally paralyzed everybody on the set. I don't think they'd ever heard anything like it. And it was genuine, because there's some agent in this blood, glycerine, whatever. I felt someone had put a red-hot poker into my eye.
Le film rapporta plus de 35 millions de francs, soit 70 fois plus qu'il n'avait coûté. La Hammer avait créé un personnage qui dépassait toutes ses espérances.
Hammer made their first remake after the 29 pictures in 1956 or 58, I think it was. And it was the Frankenstein picture, and it was only one amongst 5. There was Up the Junction, I think it was Peter Sellers, and Frankenstein picture, and 2 or 3 others, quite a nice picture. No idea of starting this incredible snowball.
I remember everyone being astounded at the success of that movie, though. I mean, it took off. And I don't think we got very good reviews, did we?
The critics hated us. I mean, really loathed the film and loathed us. But it started the cycle, and it started Hammer, as it really became known, Hammer Horror. The critical reaction came at the same moment as the cues. I mean, if you've got a choice, what are you going to do? You're going to read the newspaper or look at the cues?
The success of Curse of Frankenstein was way out of proportion to what was expected. I think if that picture hadn't been as successful as it was in America, there might not have been any other big Hammer films.
Par l'entremise de son ami Mike Frankovich, James Carreras conclut avec la Columbia une commande de 3 films. L'un d'eux devait être la suite de Frankenstein s'est échappé. Son scénario devait relater les différentes tentatives du baron Frankenstein pour parfaire sa sinistre créature.
I wanted to scare people and make them sort of shudder. And I think what is the most shudder-making thing, from my point of view, was cannibalism. So I put cannibalism into the picture.
In the year 1860, I, Baron Frankenstein, was sentenced to death on the guillotine. But I have escaped the guillotine, and I shall avenge the death of my creation.
As Peter and I used to play games on the set all the time, we'd play...
Who is he? Nobody. He isn't born yet.
We had a sheep's brain. The technicians forgot to put the brain in the fridge. And the smell was appalling. All the technicians were fainting.
I think what he's doing is a ruthless thing. It might be different from Mary Shelley, but it wasn't much different from other movie Frankensteins.
Il y eut aussi un téléfilm pilote tourné à Hollywood, non pas par la Hammer, mais par une autre équipe de production.
It's just disaster. I mean, the people who were involved, which was Screen Gems, had no idea what they were trying to make. I don't know why they ever came to us in the first place, because, you know, we had made some fairly good Gothic stories. Tony Hines went over to finish the project, and even he couldn't get them to make a good film.
On ose imaginer ce qu'eût été le film sans son intervention. En 1963, la Hammer renoua avec Frankenstein. Un lutteur du nom de Kiwi Kingston interpréta le rôle du monstre sous la direction de Freddie Francis.
Terry was unwell at that time. I mean, Terry became unwell and then got progressively worse. By this time, Hammer had cleared with Universal that they could use the original makeup. And I thought it needed somebody much more physical than dear old Chris. And our man was physical, but I would have, you know, if we did it again, I would have somebody who could act a little better. And obviously, I usually think of the most effective way visually. Having been a DP, and still am, I always think visually first.
Le baron était légèrement en avance sur son temps. Il transplantait déjà des organes humains quelques années avant le professeur Christian Barnard, qui réalisa la première greffe du cœur en Afrique du Sud en 1968.
You are interrupting my work.
Your work. The work of the devil.
Hands. Please, Father. You can't. No!
Terence Fisher fit son retour en 1967.
The Terence Fisher pictures tend to be shot on long masters, I noticed. So one of the fascinations in those pictures is just to sort of watch him try to do something with essentially an empty frame.
Fisher engagea des acteurs débutants comme la playmate Suzanne Denberg et peaufina les scènes d'action. Le film s'intitula Frankenstein créa la femme.
Who am I? Who am I?
The Frankenstein Created Woman is a very interesting picture. It's got a lot of interesting thematic stuff that you really wouldn't expect, that they didn't have to deal with. In Frankenstein Created Woman in particular, I remember great stills of Peter Cushing and Susan Denberg that weren't in the movie. You know, and I could never figure out whether they were never shot or whether they were cut out or what the story was.
Les affiches n'avaient aucun rapport avec l'intrigue du film. Hammer voulait juste attirer les spectateurs. En 1967, une nouvelle version de Frankenstein fut tournée dans les studios agrandis d'Elstree sous la direction, une fois de plus, de Terence Fisher.
Terry would pretty much let you go through the scene. He trusted your own instincts. He was very easy to work for.
You haven't finished.
He would just tell you what you'd be doing previous to this, what your emotions would be likely to be like, and then ask you to run it through.
Right. Action.
Scientist, surgeon, madman, murderer.
I can transplant his brain. If I don't, it'll die through lack of oxygen.
But that would mean you'd have to remove someone else's brain to do it. Of course, Carl. How else?
Il était de nouveau question de chantage, de meurtre et de machination diabolique.
Oh, but he's only doing it for a frightfully good cause.
I loved Peter. He was very gentle. Everybody loved Peter. He was very gentle. He adored his wife. He was kind.
What a lovely piece of export.
I can't speak too highly of him.
What have you done to him? For God's sake, go away! Leave us alone!
James Carreras n'aimait pas trop les films d'horreur. Et quand il voyait une équipe d'une quarantaine ou d'une cinquantaine de personnes apparemment inoccupées, il devenait quelque peu irritable.
La Hammer choisit un baron plus jeune en la personne du regretté Ralph Bates. Veronica Carlson reprit le rôle interprété par Hazel Court. Le film fut écrit, produit et réalisé par Jimmy Sangster.
We had a great sense of humor. At lunchtime, we went into the restaurant, laughed ourselves silly about everything, calmed down, and then Jimmy said, "Now be serious."
I had the most fun ever directing that movie, which is not a good position to be in, writer, producer, and the director, because there's nobody to tell you you're making a mistake.
It's almost like the same saga that the Universal Pictures had, where they kept adding more monsters and trying to, make the pictures seem more exciting than they had been previously, and then by the time they'd done the parodies, it was over. It's the same thing that's happened to the Western.
David Prowse, qui mesurait près de 2 mètres, interpréta un monstre chauve qui portait des couches. David sembla plus impressionnant quelques années plus tard, dans La Guerre des Étoiles, où il était vêtu de cuir noir. Comme d'habitude, le scénario du film suivant s'inspira d'une affiche qui fut finalement modifiée. Ayant perdu l'usage de ses mains grièvement brûlées, le baron engage un jeune chirurgien pour l'aider à perpétrer sa dernière abomination. Ce fut la dernière apparition du baron sur grand écran. Pour les besoins du film, Peter Cushing fut affublé d'une perruque. Il avait l'impression de ressembler à Helen Hayes.
I knew you couldn't give up your work completely. And you haven't.
If I succeeded this time, then every sacrifice will have been worthwhile.
Simple employé au sein de la Hammer, Roy Skeggs fut promu au rang de producteur. Tony Hines signa le scénario sous le nom de John Elder. Le compositeur Jimmy Bernard et le réalisateur Terence Fisher reprirent leur collaboration pour ce qui allait être leur dernier film ensemble. David Prowse interpréta le monstre dans un costume en latex recouvert de poils.
Le monstre ne fut pas une grande réussite, mais le baron ne se départit pas de sa cordialité et de son amabilité habituelle.
If everything could be reborn, unblemished. If a new version of his true self could be created, huh? In the normal way, by mating. But who with? Sarah.
Ces films furent les premiers à répandre sur les écrans des flots d'hémoglobine en Technicolor. Sans eux, des films comme La Horde sauvage, Taxi Driver ou même MASH n'auraient jamais vu le jour.
To Baron Frankenstein, creator of man.
La Hammer insuffla une seconde vie au personnage mythique né sous la plume de Mary Shelley. En retour, Frankenstein créa la Hammer.
They will never be rid of me.
En 1958, la Hammer obtint d'Universal l'autorisation de tourner un remake de Dracula et lui céda en contrepartie les droits de distribution pour les États-Unis.
Well, Horror of Dracula was a particularly big moment in my life and the life of a lot of kids my age. We had watched the Universal pictures, and they were scary, but they were on television in your house. So there was something about there was a little safer about watching those pictures. But in a theater with color, I remember kids' parents not letting them go see it because it was supposed to be so scary.
D'un côté, les forces du bien.
Castle Dracula this summer here in Klausenberg. Will you tell me how I get there?
De l'autre, le charme envoûtant du mal. Dans son scénario, Jimmy Sangster substitua au pouvoir surnaturel suggéré par Bram Stoker une force bien plus redoutable, le sex appeal.
I thought the more human he became, the less magic or fantasy figure he became, the more threatening he was.
À l'instar de ce Dracula, tous les vampires de cinéma furent ensuite pourvus de canines plastiques, qu'il s'agisse de films hollywoodiens, italiens, mexicains, français ou même japonais. Cet accessoire constituait un changement radical par rapport aux versions précédentes.
You must help me. You must. You're my only hope. You must.
I'll help you. I promise.
I decided to play him as a malevolent hero. I decided to play him as a man of immense dignity, immense strength, immense power, immense brain, because it's all there. He's a kind of a Superman, actually.
Dracula was sexy, and he was seducing people, and it was basically going to bed with women. You know, and afterward they just thought he was great.
Particularly as my dear friend Christopher Lee plays the character of Dracula, the women are very much attracted to him. I mean, that first picture, you had the lady opening her French windows, didn't you, lying back and waiting for her lover to come.
Well, that was definitely in the screenplay, and I think Terry Fisher, the director, certainly emphasized it. It wasn't a new ingredient. I mean, it's definitely been there. If you look at Nosferatu, and I mean, even in the strangest forms of these films, there's a strong sexual element. But in the color, again, the blood became a little more gory, the sex became a little more cleavage, and the whole thing grew up a little.
It was quite original, I think, making him a very presentable, quite sexually attractive, not to me, but quite sexually attractive actor, instead of this rather florid, puffy-faced gentleman, the one associated with.
Ce thème musical, composé de 3 notes, soulignait le pouvoir maléfique du comte Dracula.
Taking the title of the movie, is that what you mean? And thinking of a tune that fits it, and the obvious one is Dracula.
I had this date with this guy that I was trying to impress, all of 16, and I'm looking, going,
You loved. It's only a shell, possessed and corrupted by the evil of Dracula.
and I'm grabbing him and I'm doing all of this, and all of a sudden this scene comes in where they put the stake in and and I faint. Are you all right? Are you all right? And I'm going, oh God, oh God.
The end of Horror of Dracula was one of the few times that I can remember when I was a kid, people screaming in the theater. Because it was so horrible and so scary.
En termes de recettes, Le Cauchemar de Dracula devança Sueur froide d'Hitchcock, qui sortit la même année. Mais les critiques éreintèrent le film, jugé très nettement inférieur à la version de 1931. Le travail du directeur de la photographie, Jack Asher, fut néanmoins salué, et Terence Fisher confirma ses talents de réalisateur. Lors de la première à New York, le public découvrit la qualité de cette production cinématographique.
James Carreras, Tony Hines, Peter Cushing and I, the 4 of us went to the office of the president of Universal Films. And he then said, gentlemen, this film of yours will lift Universal out of bankruptcy. Now, I've made a point of asking Peter Cushing and Tony Hines and Jimmy Carreras over the years, did he really say that, or did I imagine it? He said it. Interesting.
En 1960, le film Les Maîtresses de Dracula mit en scène un baron à la sexualité ambiguë. Il s'abreuvait indifféremment du sang des hommes et des femmes et buvait même celui de sa propre mère. Le film offrit des rôles forts à Martita Hunt et Freda Jackson. La réalisation fut de nouveau signée Terence Fisher. Le docteur Van Helsing y poursuivit sa croisade contre le culte du vampirisme.
Pour des raisons d'ordre budgétaire, l'une des scènes clés du film fut supprimée. Elle devait montrer Van Helsing exhortant une horde de chauves-souris à attaquer le baron dépravé. Elle fut remplacée par une scène dans laquelle le docteur aspergeait Dracula d'eau bénite dans un moulin à vent bientôt dévoré par les flammes. 8 ans après la version de 1958, le comte Dracula refit une apparition remarquée. Le rituel choisi pour faire renaître le comte des cendres du film précédent fut censuré par la commission britannique. La Hammer dut donc apporter une légère modification au scénario original. Au lieu de couper la tête de sa victime, le disciple de Dracula lui trancha la gorge, ce qui fut jugé d'un goût moins douteux.
I must kill him. He is already dead. He is undead, Mr. Kent. He can be destroyed, but not killed.
Au cours du mois de mai 1965, le frère de Francis Matthews déambula dans les studios avec sa caméra et filma 3 jours de tournage. Les angles choisis pour tourner ces séquences ne rendent pas compte de la hauteur du château, qui n'avait en réalité qu'un étage. De grandes scènes furent filmées dans ces décors, et notamment le dénouement final.
Sur ces images, Suzanne Farmer et Barbara Shelley jettent un dernier coup d'œil à leurs répliques. Charles Tingle somnole, Christopher Lee discute d'une scène, et Francis Matthews mesure en pas la distance jusqu'au pont-levis du château.
The heroes are always boring in those films. They have to be because the excitement comes from the character roles and the villain. Since you're not going to do anything, it's better you don't say anything either. I wish you could run it again and hear me saying, I must kill him, just after this terrible thing has happened. It's not only the delivery of the line, but the fact that I allowed Terry to let me say the line. My sister-in-law's a vampire, my brother's dead, my wife's nearly been killed, I'm exhausted. There was always a danger with Hammer that they forgot what had happened to you.
Le maquilleur, Roy Ashton, avait confectionné des verres de contact peints à la main pour donner l'impression que Christopher Lee avait les yeux injectés de sang. Parfois, quand il les portait, sa vue se brouillait et il ratait les coups qu'il devait asséner à ses partenaires. Fisher lui disait « Montre-moi ce que tu vas faire et je te dirai si ça va ». Et il fournissait toujours au monteur James Needs toutes les images dont il avait besoin.
Le premier assistant, Burt Batt, supervise la création de la douve gelée réalisée à l'aide d'une couche de plâtre couverte d'une solution saline. Dès que Terence crie moteur, Christopher Lee avance majestueusement à grandes enjambées pour faire onduler sa cape. Quelques heures plus tard, la dernière scène du film fut tournée.
Les répliques de Dracula étaient si mauvaises qu'il fut décidé d'en faire un personnage muet.
Dracula résistait aux balles, mais pas aux éléments naturels. On peut discuter les mérites de tous ces longs métrages, mais les compétences des équipes techniques, le sens de la mise en scène et le talent des comédiens prouvèrent, s'il en était besoin, que les films britanniques avaient leur place sur le marché du cinéma mondial.
Sur les 19 films distribués par la Fox en 1966, seuls 6 furent rentables. 2 d'entre eux portaient le sceau de la Hammer, Dracula, prince des ténèbres et Rasputin. Par la suite, la Hammer put s'offrir les services de cascadeur comme Eddie Powell pour les scènes les plus dangereuses. Mais sur ces images, Lee n'a pas de doublure. C'est bien lui qui s'enfonce dans une eau glaciale par amour du 7e art.
La costumière Rosemary Burroughs essuie la cape et les chaussures de Dracula. Puis Christopher Lee enlève discrètement ses vêtements trempés avant d'avaler un martini. Mais la glace dégela moins de 2 ans après. Et Dracula refit surface.
I know that on that one, Terry was definitely not fit, so there was never any question of them asking Terry to do it.
Le réalisateur Freddie Francis avait remporté l'Oscar du meilleur directeur de la photographie.
And then later, when people like Freddie Francis, who was the DP, started to direct, the pictures would go in for a little bit more gimmicky visuals.
Arthur Grant, he was a great fan of mine when I was a cameraman. And I let him use my filters from The Innocents for that, with the sort of graduating colours coming in from the side.
Ces filtres orangés nimbaient les personnages d'une aura diabolique.
There is a girl.
Maria?
Bring her to me.
Irresistible to women, unstoppable by men.
Christopher Lee, Veronica Carlson, Hammer's new star discovery, Dracula's most beautiful victim.
Well, I used to skip classes at college if I knew there was a new Dracula film out or a new Frankenstein film out, and they were always the Hammer films. I don't think that I thought that I would ever be up there with them, but I yearned to be just that, and I pretended.
They lost a lot of what I'd hoped to get in it. I wanted to accentuate the romantic interest between the boy and the girl, and which I did do in the shooting, but as I say, once we'd finished shooting, the film was put in the mincing machine and wound up. I went away for a week's holiday, and when I came back, they'd finished editing it. The film was probably due out in about another 2 weeks anyway.
Very tall, very aristocratic, beautiful operatic voice. I think he is the epitome of Dracula. It was a dream come true.
Le distributeur américain trouva un slogan publicitaire idiot mais efficace, nom de nom, quel suçon.
The big difference that those pictures had at the time from American pictures was they were not just gorier, because the gore, if you look back at them, was actually kind of tame, although at the time it was a bit more than people were used to, but it's mainly the sex. The parade of buxom British starlets, close-ups, alleged close-ups on medallions that are really, you know, huge buxom shots. These myths have a certain built-in Freudian fascination that never really goes away.
But no, you're talking about the Van Helsing riding a stake in is sexual. Well, if you like to look at it the way it is, but I don't think that's ever meant. But no, the reason for staking Dracula is to get rid of him.
Dracula faillit bel et bien mourir. Pour des raisons budgétaires, le comptable Brian Lawrence suggéra de produire un long métrage qui n'ait de Dracula que le nom. Mais le distributeur américain insista pour que le célèbre conte apparaisse dans le film. James Carreras supplia Lee de tourner dans cette production en lui disant qu'il priverait d'emploi toute l'équipe s'il n'acceptait pas. Lee ne pouvait pas décemment refuser. Mais il fallait qu'ils intègrent son personnage dans le scénario. Finalement, sa prestation se limita à de courtes apparitions.
Désireux de casser son image, Christopher Lee joua dans The Magic Christian, film dont il partagea la vedette avec Raquel Welch.
And Christopher and I became good friends also at one point when I was living in London. He and his wife Gita, but they were very nice people, and he was quite an elegant and quite a sensual Dracula. I thought that was just an act, and he was quite like Dracula, actually, Christopher.
Dans l'année qui suivit, la Hammer sortit un autre Dracula.
What I was trying to incorporate is the element of magic, the mystery, the touch of the supernatural. There was one thing that nobody else had ever done, which was when the hero, Jonathan Harkness, I think it is in the book, he looks out of his window and he sees Dracula climb out of a window of the castle. But it had a certain amount of opposition because it was going to cost money to build a special set for this. But at any rate, we did.
Mais ce film ne fut distribué aux États-Unis que dans quelques salles.
Pour perpétuer la lignée des vampires du 7e art, la Hammer avait besoin d'un apport de sang neuf.
I think it came from a distributor. I think it was partly accepted by us eagerly as a change of scene. It didn't work. It was a mistake.
Le regretté cinéaste canadien Alan Gibson repoussa les limites du genre. Et le vampirisme devint à la mode.
That was the first time, I think, in my short career at that time that I realized that I actually did want to act. This was really it, because I believed in what I was doing.
Something new, yet as old as time.
Come on, Johnny.
A date with the devil.
I was Dracula's disciple. I was 22 and enjoyed it enormously. But he was absolutely the part, you know. You couldn't imagine anyone being better than him or being more impressive than him.
I summoned you! It was my will.
Just his presence alone helped you, you know what I mean?
Ce film fut marqué par le retour de Peter Cushing, qui interpréta le descendant du docteur Van Helsing.
He was delightful. He was very tough and very, very fit for a man of his age. And I would do a lot of the stunt with him, you know, and grappling and so on. And he was in very good shape. And he did a lot of his own stunts. I mean, falling off hay wagons and things like that. Extraordinary man.
You could be Dracula's next victim.
Seriously, I am a fully fledged vampire because we had the scene where I had to Christopher Lee sunk his fangs into me, and he actually he got a little carried away and drew blood. So I am a fully fledged vampire. That is one of my claims to fame, which I have on my resume.
You don't have to act much because he is very frightening when he has all his gear on, his white face and the contact lenses, and he's very tall. I'm not small, and he is very tall. At that moment, I was being bitten by Dracula, and I believed it.
Christopher Lee émit de nombreuses réserves concernant le scénario.
Il abandonna le rôle en 1972 car il trouvait que les scénarios s'éloignaient trop du personnage du livre et de son contexte historique. Un Dracula des temps modernes, cela n'avait plus aucun sens.
Néanmoins, dès que les caméras se mettaient à tourner, Christopher Lee et Peter Cushing donnaient tous les deux le meilleur d'eux-mêmes. Le dernier Dracula qu'interpréta Christopher Lee voulait exterminer la race humaine à l'aide d'un virus mortel pour se priver de victimes humaines. Il était animé de pulsions de mort.
Van Helsing, I call upon you to witness my supreme trial.
You are living and yet you are dead, the undead. You cannot die. You must want to.
Ce fut l'une des rares répliques du livre de Bram Stoker qui fut conservée dans le scénario. Ce long-métrage fut finalement achevé des années plus tard aux États-Unis sous le titre Dracula 73.
D'autres bons acteurs ont depuis revêtu la célèbre cape noire. Frank Langella, Jack Palance, Louis Jourdan, George Hamilton et Gary Oldman. Mais le Dracula de la Hammer restera sans doute gravé à jamais dans la mémoire des spectateurs.
I am Dracula, and I welcome you to my house.
Les nouvelles installations des Bray Studios reflétèrent l'expansion de la compagnie Hammer.
And we all lived through the times when the first stage went up. There was never a stage when I went there. And then a second stage went up. The field where we shot Quatermass with the rocket coming down and the tree and all the fire engines, they finally built stage on that too and everything. So all our stuff there went.
On apercevait aux abords du studio toutes sortes d'accessoires macabres.
In those days, the filmmakers still actually knew how to make films and not deals.
We had 6 weeks to make the movies.
Well, one just had to do it in the time that was allotted, and it was never enough.
After we'd been making them a while, I was asked if we could cut down, make them a bit cheaper. I was always being asked that.
The ready reckoner, if you've got a ready reckoner in your mind, that ticks over, and you know exactly which line to take.
Construction, it's 85%. Dialogue's not important. The actors are going to change. The actors and the directors are going to change the dialogue anyway.
If an audience thinks about Jimmy's script, then you're dead. But Jimmy used to get them rattling along at such a pace that the audience didn't have time to think about them.
We would bring films in on budget and on schedule and deliver them. The Americans were really only interested in delivery dates because once they put it on a piece of paper, it was gospel.
If any of us could get any artistic points in, we could. But the whole overall operation was a sort of business, financial situation.
Well, I have to say that, yes, they didn't like spending too much money.
I was earning my wages, basically.
I thought the stars were behind the camera more than in front of it.
Tony Hines, who was really the head of production at any rate at Hammer.
He was a very shy man and didn't get involved in films on the floor. He was real behind-the-scenes guy.
Tony was the master at it, and he had Terry there. I mean, why interfere with a winning formula?
Tony would never complain if one altered a little bit here and there.
We did a bit on location and a lot in the studio.
It started with them when they were exclusive films,
And they used to send me a script and say, Andrew, what can you do with this? It was like being in rep.
We were all a wonderful team, really.
I was ready, and they buried me up to my neck, and it was getting on for lunchtime. So they said, right, we'll come and shoot the scene after lunch. So there I was, left.
The art direction, of course, was absolutely superb.
Bernard Robinson had an art director for certainly all the original horror films. Very, very clever man in making a lot out of not very much.
They had an excellent team, and they got marvellous sound from this comparatively small orchestra.
We never went over budget or over schedule.
There were many times when I didn't finish a score until maybe the morning of the recording.
And we delivered them, so we delivered the goods.
They made films in all sorts of genres. They made war pictures and, you know, quote, program movies.
We took a few more chances, perhaps, but the structure, the family feeling, the flavor, the units, the directors, remained very much the same.
En écoutant les musiques de James Bernard, on entend les syllabes composant les titres des films.
Technically, the pictures were very good. Jack Asher's camera work and James Bernard's scores were exceptional. They seemed to be doomed to do the same thing. It just had to keep repeating themselves over and over.
Bernie Robinson, brilliant. An awful lot of what we got away with, and I can actually say got away with, was due to Bernie. In Yesterday's Enemy, it was the Burma War thing. Bernie did revolving jungles and things. Lord Louis Mountbatten, who was president of the Burma Star Association, sat next to me at the premiere. And during the picture, he said, I know that place. Where did you shoot that? I know that place. I hadn't the heart to say on stage 3 at Shepperton. And then they had a set there, which was a Ruritanian village, which was a standby set they kept the whole time. I have to keep repairing it.
Après quelques aménagements, ce décor fut transformé en une impasse malfamée de Paris, en un quartier du Londres victorien et en dock de Hong Kong. Pour le remake de La Momie, tourné en 1959, l'équipe du directeur artistique Bernard Robinson dut recréer les tombes de l'Égypte ancienne.
It was a very good movie. It looked absolutely wonderful. It looked like a multi-million-dollar film. You know, the real stars of Hammer, in my opinion, were people like Bernard Robinson, the art director.
Les choix de la pré-production laissaient Peter Cushing souvent perplexe. L'affiche de ce film montrait la momie en rase campagne, le corps transpercé par un faisceau lumineux qui rappelait celui des phares des voitures. Un jour, Peter Cushing dit à Terence Fisher: « On ne peut pas tromper le public. Puis-je prendre le harpon fixé au mur et le planter dans le corps de ce vieux Christopher? Il n'aura qu'à l'enlever et à continuer à marcher comme si de rien n'était. »
But it did enable me, with movement and with the eyes and the thought in the eyes, to create a character. The movement is terribly important, how you reach out a hand. How you reach out a hand, is it to take somebody, or is it, you know, because you're desperately seeking help?
Tony didn't think the Mummy was serious enough. I mean, by this time he's now steeped in the true Gothics, and it's quite true, the Mummy is a little bit more colourful and a little bit more adventurous. I liked doing it. In fact, the only horror films I ever personally made were the 2 Mummies, or if not 3, I can't remember. I enjoyed directing, of course, yes. I mean, I don't know anybody who wouldn't enjoy directing.
Kenneth Hyman, fils d'un associé de la Hammer et futur président de la Warner, proposa une série de films sur Sherlock Holmes qui débuta avec Le Chien des Baskerville.
Some revolting sacrificial rite has been performed. What depths a human being can sink to.
What human being could have done this?
That is precisely what I intend to find out.
But how can you be so certain that somebody took one of the bishop's spiders and deliberately placed it in Sir Henry's room? That it wasn't in the luggage he brought from South Africa?
Elementary, my dear Watson. There are no tarantulas in South Africa. What do you want me to do? Identify anything I may find. Strange things are to be found on the moor. Like this, for instance.
In fact, after doing The Curse of Frankenstein, the next part I played was the romantic lead, Sir Henry Baskerville, in The Hunt of the Baskervilles.
Why? You thought it was going to be easy, didn't you? Didn't you? You won't be the first of your family who thought that. And you won't be the first to die because of it.
Malheureusement, Sherlock Holmes n'inspira pas une longue série de films, à la différence de Dracula et Frankenstein.
Le dramaturge Wolf Mankiewicz fut payé 2 fois plus que les autres scénaristes de la Hammer pour écrire cette version freudienne de Dr. Jekyll.
Let me alone, Jekyll. Let me alone. Jekyll.
I deserve nothing better than you.
Desire drove her to deception. Jealousy drove him to madness.
Will we ever know who we really are? Who are you, Kitty? Who are you?
Where's Henry?
Believe me, your husband is here.
Mais le public n'apprécia guère le scénario et ne succomba pas au charme du séduisant Mr. Hyde. Le film, qui sortit sous plusieurs titres, fut un véritable fiasco.
At that time, we actually were doing, in my opinion, some of the best films we ever made. Tony found The Pony Cart, which I think was a play, and turned it into a very strong film, a warning, never take sweets from a stranger.
That's right. That was the only film I photographed for them, yes, which I thought was a very good film. I think that's the trouble. If you have a sort of trademark like Hammer, you have to keep producing the same films.
The critics never forgave us for being successful, there's no doubt about that. They accused us of really trying to capitalize on the elements of it. It was a very, very wrong criticism. And it was started by a couple of critics who actually never, ever gave a Hammer film of any sort a good critic.
Les damnés fit très peu d'entrées en salle. Ces échecs commerciaux successifs incitèrent James Carreras à revenir à des productions plus conformes au style de la Hammer. Il souhaitait renouer avec le succès. Michael Carreras fit aménager le parking des studios pour y tourner un film sur l'Inquisition espagnole, mais l'association de défense des valeurs catholiques menaça de le faire censurer. Heureusement, James Carreras proposa un autre projet qui enthousiasma Universal. Il s'agissait d'un film tiré du roman Le Loup-garou de Paris de Guy Andor. Mais la Hammer dut débourser de grosses sommes d'argent pour racheter les droits d'adaptation. Pour réduire les frais de production, Tony Hines se chargea de l'écriture du scénario. Les censeurs britanniques critiquèrent sévèrement le film. Ils estimèrent que Le Loup-garou était conçu dans des circonstances trop violentes et que sa naissance le jour de Noël constituait un sacrilège. Ils s'offusquèrent même de voir un aristocrate se gratter la croûte d'une cicatrice. La Hammer objecta que le film était moins terrifiant que Psychose d'Hitchcock, ce à quoi les censeurs rétorquèrent « Terence Fisher n'est pas Alfred Hitchcock ».
Oliver Reed, Leslie Ann Down, Donald Sutherland et Freddie Jones comptent parmi les nombreux acteurs qui débutèrent à la Hammer. Les comédiens Michael Ripper, Richard Wadsworth, George Woodbridge et Miles Malleson jouaient dans presque tous les films de la compagnie.
The quality of acting in those pictures was way above what you would usually get in that kind of film. People realized that good actors could indeed find elements in these characters that really brought out some of the drama.
Frustré de ne produire que des films d'horreur, Michael Carreras quitta la Hammer en 1961.
I mean, I went off and did my thing for a couple of years. I did a musical, which I always wanted to do. I made a western, which things I would never have been able to do at Hammer.
Les activités de production incombèrent à Tony Hines, qui les délégua à Tony Nelson Keyes, puis à Alda Young, qui fut l'une des premières productrices anglaises.
I don't think Aida was as dedicated as we were. She, rightly so in a way, her idea was just to get the film through.
Tony Hines devait veiller à limiter les coûts de production. Le directeur de la photographie, Jack Asher, travaillait bien, mais lentement. Or, le temps, c'était de l'argent. La Hammer engagea donc d'autres chefs opérateurs, tels que Michael Reed et Arthur Grant. Les budgets furent considérablement réduits.
I said, there's one way we can make them back to back. That is to say, we do a picture, same car, same sets, and do 2 pictures.
I remember seeing Rasputin, the Mad Monk, and the Reptile, and they were all shot in the same sets, and Dracula, Prince of Darkness, and Plague of the Zombies were all shot in the same sets. So it was sort of like watching the same picture twice.
Ayant appris que Cary Grant souhaitait jouer dans un film d'horreur, Tony Hines remania le scénario du Fantôme de l'Opéra. Mais Grant déclina l'offre. Il fut remplacé par Herbert Lom.
Young woman, you must come with me.
Dans ce film, plus que dans tout autre, Terence Fisher accentua l'aspect à la fois tragique et romantique de l'histoire. Le scénario ayant été écrit pour Cary Grant, le rôle ingrat de meurtrier était confié à un nain. Dans sa campagne promotionnelle, le distributeur insista lourdement sur le fait qu'il s'agissait d'un film d'horreur.
Mais les lecteurs du roman de Gaston Leroux savent qu'il s'agit avant tout d'une histoire d'amour tragique. Ne saisissant pas le message du film, Time Magazine déclara que ce long-métrage était aussi effrayant qu'un grand-père en costume d'Halloween. Le distributeur rejeta la responsabilité de cet échec sur Terence Fisher, qui n'avait pas réalisé de film pour la Hammer depuis 2 ans. Tony Hines produisit un autre film sur le vampirisme, intitulé « Le baiser du vampire », qui s'inscrivait dans la lignée des maîtresses de Dracula. Le réalisateur Don Sharp se révéla aussi doué que Terence Fisher pour l'érotisme gothique. Dans ce film, plus encore que dans la série des Dracula, le vampirisme était intimement lié à la luxure. Richard Matheson, auteur de L'homme qui rétrécit, adapta son roman intitulé « Je suis une légende ». Mais le scénario fut censuré en Angleterre. La Hammer le vendit à Robert Lippert, qui le tourna en Italie avec Vincent Price sous le titre « The Last Man on Earth ».
Matheson adapta également un roman de Dennis Whitley. Ce film sortit sur les écrans français sous le titre « Les Vierges de Satan ».
I remember Tony Hines ringing me and saying, Jimmy, you've got to do a very good job on this because I don't think it's working. Anyway, he was quite wrong in his judgment, wasn't he?
The lights. What about the lights? They seem to be dimmer.
Terence Fisher se retrouva à nouveau derrière la caméra. Chaque fois qu'il filmait Christopher Lee en gros plan, celui-ci allait le voir et lui glissait un billet de 5 livres dans la main pour plaisanter. Mais l'équipe de tournage croyait vraiment qu'il le soudoyait.
En 1968, la Hammer se vit décerner une récompense prestigieuse, le Queen's Award for Industry, pour avoir rapporté pendant 3 années consécutives 25 millions de francs à la Grande-Bretagne.
They weren't given the Queen's Award for Industry, whatever, for nothing. I mean, they were really making a dent in the American market in a way that I don't think anybody has made since.
Les créateurs de la série Chapeau melon et bottes de cuir fournirent à la Hammer une idée de film née d'une plaisanterie au cours d'un dîner.
Brian Clemens was sitting there, and Brian suddenly said, I know what happens. He mixes up the potion, he drinks it, and he turns into a woman. Well, we all fell about laughing. It's a very funny idea, but he wasn't laughing. He went home and he wrote the script.
Ralph Bates décrocha le rôle de Dr. Jekyll, mais la Hammer eut quelques difficultés à trouver l'interprète de Sister Hyde.
There was some talk about me playing Sister Hyde. I was going to say Dr. Jekyll. And a very fine actress went on to play. There was quite a bit of nudity, and I wasn't that keen on that.
David Booth, I think was the name of the agent, said, "Oh, Martine, it's perfect. You've come at the absolute perfect times." And they said, "They've got the guy, and and it's Hammer." And I said, "Michael Carreras?" He said, "Yes." And I read the script, and I realized that they had some nudity, and I said, "Okay, fine, top, but not full nudity." I agreed to do that because I thought it was an important change. And in fact, I still think it's probably one of the best scenes in the film.
But of course, once you saw the two of them together, it was a brilliant piece of casting. And she did it very well, too.
But unfortunately, he was pressured. I think everybody was pressured, including Hammer was being pressured into going into more nudity, to compete with what was going on. And they decided to go even further to full frontal nudity when I got on the set, and I said I did not agree to that, So we had a bit of a contretemps. However, I used all of that sort of nervousness and that sort of rage and anger and stuff to birth myself, really. I mean, when I am there, I don't know anything about my anatomy, even.
It is I who exist, Dr. Jekyll, not you. It is I who will be rid of you. Rid of you!
Interesting idea, the male to the female, and this could be so great. They could have taken it so much further.
It's Hyde, isn't it? How is your brother?
He hasn't been himself of late.
Years later, when I saw Roy Ward Baker, he said to me, "Martine, I wish we had really gone into the male-female."
Dans les années 70, les productions de la Hammer montrèrent un peu plus de sang et beaucoup plus de chair. Les costumes victoriens offraient au regard des décolletés plongeants. Dès 1959, la Hammer montra une femme dénudée dans The Man Who Could Cheat Death.
Which is a remake of The Man in Half Moon Street. Anton Diffring was one of the premier actors of the Berlin Theatre.
I've been taking this fluid every 6 hours now. It's madness. It is what keeps me alive.
It was very necessary. It was in very good taste. But England at that time would have no nudity. So there was a version which they paid me extra for Europe. And it was very beautifully done.
Ce fut aussi une opération commerciale très réussie.
I think Hammer films were exploitation films. I mean, exploitation films basically are films that are designed to exploit via advertising a particular sensational aspect. And if you ever look at the British ads for Hammer films, they are incredibly tasteless. I mean, they really make the pictures look like AIP pictures from the 50s, whereas the American ads tend to be models of restraint, actually, in comparison.
Contrairement aux acteurs, les actrices de la Hammer faisaient souvent office de porte-manteau et tournaient rarement plus de 2 ou 3 films pour la compagnie.
I'd been doing a poster for an English campaign called Lamb's Navy Rum. And apparently he used to see this big hoarding or this big poster every day. Supposedly he said, "Find that girl and bring her in." And then I was put under contract for a year, which is wonderful. But no duties, no official duties.
I had a photograph on the front page of one of the tabloid papers in England one Sunday, and Jimmy Carreras saw it and said, "I'd like that girl for my next Hammer film." He would take care of you. He was a fatherly type figure, and he had everyone's respect.
Des producteurs indépendants proposèrent à la Hammer une histoire de fantôme Victor, écrite par Sheridan Le Fagno.
Harry Fine and Michael Style came to me and asked me to do it. But they were reading into it a great deal of lesbianism, which I don't think Sheridan Le Fagno had ever sort of dreamed of, and neither did I, incidentally. It was the old story that 100 vampire pictures have been made. What on earth can we do next with vampires? I know, we'll make them lesbians. Yeah, brilliant.
It's very funny, actually, because I walked onto the set the first day of my shooting. The fangs kept falling out, and they kept falling into Kate O'Mara's cleavage, and the crew wanted to help retrieve them.
And it's very easy to make lunatics or vicars or indeed lesbians or homosexuals of various kinds, to make them figures of fun. To me, that is fatal. I think that's, well, it's downright rude and vulgar, apart from anything else.
Le film fut coproduit par American International Pictures, alter ego hollywoodien de la Hammer.
A certain amount of criticism while I was making it, that it wasn't going to be juicy enough, you know, and all that.
La beauté et le charme d'Ingrid Pitt crevèrent l'écran et ne laissèrent pas de marbre son partenaire Freddie Main.
We knew each other. We'd met in Salzburg and worked together. I thought, well, I won't forget that one. She used rather provocative language in between takes, and it was rather delicious to be bitten by her.
In The Vampire Lovers, for instance, somebody throws a dagger at Ingrid Pitt, and the dagger goes straight through her, and she just disappears. It's a romantic view, an essential element in horror pictures, which has been almost, well, now totally lost.
Avant même la sortie du film, le tournage de la suite débuta dans les mêmes décors. Dans ce deuxième opus, qui ne fut pas un chef-d'œuvre, Jute Stensgaard reprit le rôle de Carmilla, interprétée par Ingrid Pitt. Peter Cushing dut renoncer au projet car sa femme tomba gravement malade. Il fut remplacé par Ralph Bates. La réalisation devait être assurée par Terence Fisher.
And Terry got sick, and that was about within 2 or 3 weeks of starting shooting, and they asked me would I like to do it, and I said yes. I was engaged as a director without much muscle. Hated the movie, hated it.
Evidence? Of what?
That you are a vampire.
I hope to become known as an extremely good actress. And I hope to get an Oscar sometime.
With Jute Stensgaard. I don't mean to demean her talent in any way. She's very talented and did a lovely job. Her claim to fame was a toothpaste commercial, and very, very well endowed, and also which helped, I'm sure.
Mary et Madeleine Collinson, les premières sœurs jumelles à avoir fait la une de Playboy, jouèrent dans le 3e volet de cette saga de femmes vampires.
The devil has sent me twins of evil.
Le personnage de Carmilla fut relégué au second plan.
They kept doing the same things to death. I mean, it was like a big thrill to have a lesbian vampire movie, which is, it turned out to not be something that people particularly wanted to see anyway.
Certaines scènes de nu des films d'horreur étaient totalement injustifiées. Ce fut le cas d'une scène de viol dans Le Retour de Frankenstein, qui fut finalement coupée car jugée inutile.
That was a big disappointment to me, and it was to Peter as well. We talked about that a lot. We were not very comfortable about it because we'd almost completed the whole film. There was no reason. I had no reaction to Frankenstein as if he'd raped me, even though the scene was put in the film much earlier. That was a very difficult thing for me to do, and it was difficult for Terry too. He was very sensitive about it, and in the end he just said enough is enough. And he cut the cameras. He just didn't want to continue them.
Les monstres féminins étaient nettement moins populaires que leurs homologues masculins. Les actrices avaient plus de succès dans les thrillers traditionnels, qu'il s'agisse de Susan Strasberg dans Test of Fear, de Bette Davis dans The Nanny ou de Tallulah Bankhead dans Fanatic. Michael Carreras et Kenny Hyman reprirent leur collaboration et produisirent un film placé sous le signe de la chair et du sang.
I was called on the telephone by Dick Zanuck, who was head of the studio then. He said, "We've got this fabulous project for you, Raquel. It's called 1 Million Years BC, and it's a remake of a Victor Mature Carol Landis movie." And I said, "Oh my God, not a dinosaur movie, man, I'll never live this one down." I figured, well, Steve McQueen got away with The Blob, you know, maybe I can get away with 1 Million Years BC, you know, nobody will remember this thing. I can shove it under the carpet, you know. But people remembered it. For the kind of films that Hammer makes, I thought that they always do a very good job. They have a certain budget. They have a certain look they're trying to achieve. It's not Gone with the Wind. It's not a David Lean movie, relatively speaking. I thought it was a pretty well-done movie. Ray Harryhausen, who was a kind of genius of sorts to do all of these the special effects and this frame-by-frame photography, and it was all explained to me, in great detail.
So I took on the project with the Hammer Company in London. It was a pleasure to get back to dinosaurs again. They were my first love.
The man was a genius. The frightening thing, of course, is that when you're looking at the rushes, after a full day's work, you go into the theatre the next day, you've got 6 frames. I mean, it's better to hold them up to the light, because otherwise they've gone through so quickly.
Carl Toms really made the most of this little doeskin number that I was supposed to wear. So this costume got smaller and smaller as the production went on, and I felt a little self-conscious with this very brief thing on all the time. Alternately, I would try to sort of strut my stuff to make the most of it, because I figured, obviously, this is why they'd cast me in this movie, not for my acting ability, because I have no lines.
I think if cave women in the early days looked like Raquel Welch, why, we've regressed considerably today.
When you were doing it, it just seemed so ridiculously silly. You felt like a fool, quite
L'actrice d'origine jamaïcaine Martine Beswick n'apprécia guère son rôle de méchante.
What was happening was that Raquel had this lovely, everything was like perfect, and mine looked like a rag, so I was a bit jealous. She had more makeup and she had eyelashes, and I had to go like a pig woman. And then you have this big girl fight in the middle. The Queen of the Shell people and the Queen of the Rock people had to have a girl fight. And we had to do destry rides again in the caves of Tenerife. The whole thing was kind of like a dance. Martine and I worked out this whole routine together. I just loved to do the action stuff. I should have been a boy.
We often wonder whether the attraction of Miss Welch or the dinosaurs were the important thing in the picture.
It started me off. So I guess Dick Zanuck was right,
We had some sets standing from a million years BC. The idea came on to make a quickie.
And he said, Martine, I've got something. He said, I want you to be my queen. I said, oh, all right, darling. What? Well, I want to do this film called
Slave Women of the White Rhino. I mean, what else can I say?
You've got to be kidding.
Why did you come?
I can only believe the fates brought me here.
And they brought you to me.
And all the little blondies had these, they just came right out of acting school. And everybody had these, like, really English voices like this, and it was hysterical.
I am queen here. I will not be denied.
Bosco Holder, Geoffrey Holder's brother. And he did all the dance scenes. I sort of was let loose after he choreographed it. I thought, listen, this is my vehicle. I get to have eyelashes in this one, and I get to have my costume fit. I'm going to make this work. No matter what it is.
We made a huge mistake on that film, because we really should have had those wonderful cartoon biff, bang, ouch. It should have been done like that.
Who are you?
Val Guest réalisa ce 3e film préhistorique à la demande de James Carreras.
Do me a picture with dinosaurs and a dinosaur with a girl in his mouth. They did this enormous great poster with sex and bikinis and this great thing. And Jimmy said, fine, okay. So he sent that to America and said, what about a picture? Here's the poster. And they set up the picture on the poster.
Les dinosaures furent créés par l'américain Jim Danforth à l'aide d'un budget très limité.
He was a brilliant little guy, because he used to work out all those monsters with little human traits to them, which I have never seen done before.
Sur ces images, Sir James s'entretient avec la productrice Alda Young et le comptable Brian Lawrence, qui dirigea par la suite la compagnie aux côtés de Roy Skeggs.
Very good face. Isn't it exciting to find somebody new and launch them each time, like these girls?
Exciting if you find somebody that looks like this,
yes.
I agree. She has to have a special kind of magnetism. I can't describe it, but I know it when I see it. And Victoria Vetri has it, I'm sure.
That was a fait accompli, yes. That came over. She had been a centerfold in Playboy or something, and whoever was doing it, I don't know who the picture was done for over there. It was AIP or whoever it was. Warner. Was it Warner's? All right. So Warner said, well, give us some glamour that we know.
Although there is a more final judge than me, and that's the audience when they see Victoria Vetri for the first time.
Mais cette production ne remporta pas le succès escompté. Le distributeur n'assura pas correctement la promotion du film et le public ne succomba pas au charme de Victoria Vetri à laquelle il préférait Raquel Welch. Danforth et Les Bowie obtinrent néanmoins une nomination aux Oscars pour leurs effets spéciaux, mais la récompense fut finalement décernée à la comédie musicale de Disney intitulée L'Apprentie sorcière.
En raison de son budget très restreint, le film Creatures the World Forgot fut tourné sans dinosaures, sans costumes et sans presque aucun dialogue. La Hammer en était réduite à réaliser de pâles imitations de ses propres productions. Mais elle n'était pas la seule.
It's over? Yes, sir. It's all over.
Dès 1958, la société de production Eros Film imita le style de Quatermass dans un long métrage intitulé The Trollenberg Terror. Elle produisit également un film d'épouvante en Technicolor dont le scénario fut signé Jimmy Frankenstein Sangster.
Sickening, isn't it?
No longer could there be this indirection and not showing things and people, describing things that had happened as opposed to seeing them. The pictures were very graphic.
Tourné à Hollywood sous la direction d'Herman Cohen, quelques mois après Frankenstein s'est échappé, ce film faisait allusion à l'ancien domicile anglais du docteur. Les caisses entassées dans son laboratoire mentionnaient même l'adresse, 113 Wardour Street, Londres.
Well, that's because Herman Cohen's office was on Wardour Street, in the same building as the Hammer Films office.
Dans les films inspirés des romans d'Edgar Allan Poe, on retrouva l'utilisation du Technicolor et des décors historiques chers à la Hammer. Hazel Court joua dans un grand nombre de ses productions d'American International Pictures.
Your hand is so cold. Oh, I don't think there's really any difference. You just have better facilities here instead of a house, that leaks.
Christopher Lee et Peter Cushing travaillaient souvent pour des concurrents tels que Rosenberg et Subotsky, qui proposèrent Frankenstein à la Hammer en 1956.
During the 60s, there were a lot of imitators of Hammer. Amicus pictures looked virtually the same, had identical casts, and I think the studio started to lose its identity a little bit.
Hollywood se mit à débourser des millions de dollars pour produire des films qui étaient jusqu'alors tournés à moindre frais. Les grands studios voulaient des stars prestigieuses et des effets spéciaux renversants. Et dans les productions à petit budget, la violence, qui était restée jusque-là secondaire, passa au premier plan. Le sensationnel faisait recette. La Hammer fut restructurée. Là de monter des films de qualité sans moyens, Tony Hines quitta la compagnie à 46 ans. Mais il continua à écrire des scénarios. Sir James usa alors de ses talents de persuasion pour faire revenir son fils dans le giron familial.
Money. I mean, I needed the dosh. I cleared my brain and came back and got on with the job.
Michael Carreras négocia une coproduction avec les studios Ron Shaw de Hong Kong.
It seemed to me that if we were going to go back and make another Dracula type, that we really ought to try and find a new way of telling the tale. So the Shaws, who I've always admired anyhow in their attitude to filmmaking, it seemed to me a natural marriage.
The idea of going to Hong Kong to make a picture, of course, was wonderful if you've never been to Hong Kong. But the difficulties were absolutely enormous. Trying to put kung fu with straightforward horror didn't work, or at least we didn't have a script that made it work.
Christopher Lee refusa de jouer dans ce film. Le conte fut donc interprété par John Forbes Robertson. Peter Cushing eut au moins l'honneur de planter un ultime pieu dans le corps de Dracula.
As the seven brothers and their one sister meet Dracula.
I think it's something else that didn't work. I'm not saying that it necessarily makes for a better picture to have those ingredients, because you're fighting the believability factor all the time. The representatives of the major American companies, they should have said this is no good. But what they said instead was, if you can make it cheaper, or if you can show a little more of this, that, or the other, we'll do it. And I think they misled us in a way.
I think that had a lot to do with the downfall of Hammer. They lowered their standards because they had their own venue, their own way of doing things, you know, and then suddenly, because everybody was doing nudity and because it was attracting more, well, it's happening again right now. Same thing's happening now.
Désormais anobli et respecté par la profession, Sir James souhaitait prendre sa retraite et vendre la compagnie. Mais son fils Michael désirait que la Hammer reste dans la famille.
I think Jimmy was bought out, or rather, Mike got controlling interest.
Our horror stories by that time were passé. I mean, they were children's stuff, when you get into chainsaw massacres and what have you. I suppose I wasn't in tune. I have to take the blame for this. I was in charge.
And Mike swears that Jimmy went round the industry and said, "Don't help my son." That's Mike's end of it. Jimmy, on the other hand, I mean, I wouldn't put that anything past him, but Jimmy, on the other hand, with that wide-eyed face, say, "I wish him all the luck in the world." You know?
Everything is born, it flowers, and then it fades away, and eventually it dies.
The Hammer period was like the last gasp of world cinema.
And as it happened, the horror thing can't go on forever. Sadly, some of the other streams that I tried to instill into the company's product line just didn't work.
No, it was none of the old gang. We saw this disintegration happening. We were rather sad for it. Because the people who were concerned with Hammer, really, other than Mike, were no longer around him.
La Hammer traversa une passe difficile. Ses scénarios empruntaient aux films de genre, mais le résultat n'était pas toujours à la hauteur.
It is commonly supposed that a vampire attacks in only one way, by biting the neck and draining the victim of blood. The girls you spoke of, they were not drained of blood, but of youth, of life itself.
La Hammer et Brian Clements tournèrent un film de KPDP dans lequel apparaissaient des vampires.
They wanted it to appear nude. So we kind of came to a compromise insofar as my hair was a lot longer in those days. And so that covered my upper chest. and I think I actually used some sort of gaffer tape or something to stick it down. So I felt quite secure in that sense. And then a pair of flesh colour knickers, briefs. And I was all right. I was all set. So it was like being on the beach, really.
Her life will be yours. Yours. Her youth will pulse through your veins, my darling. Replenishing, restoring. Take her.
At your service, sir. To the death. Yes, you bleed, my lord. This is God's blade. Forged for your black heart.
Mais ce film ne suscita pas l'engouement du public et il n'eut pas de suite.
Possibly it was too romantic. Maybe it was either ahead of its time or you know, the other way. Maybe it kind of lost in time. I'm not too sure. The timing was wrong anyway, I think.
The Lady Vanishes, ainsi qu'un film sur le Loch Ness, n'obtinrent pas un grand succès. Le dernier projet ambitieux de la Hammer vit le jour en 1975.
98% of so-called Satanists are nothing but pathetic freaks who get their kicks out of dancing naked in freezing churchyards.
I have a feeling I'm dealing with that other 2%.
Richard Widmark challenges Christopher Lee for the soul of a girl named Catherine.
Te adoro et te invoco. They've got Catherine. We've got to get her back before it's too late.
À l'époque déjà, les films dits à petit budget avoisinaient les 5 millions de francs. La Hammer trouva un cofinancement allemand et put s'offrir les services de la star américaine Richard Widmark. Naturellement, Christopher Lee jouait le rôle du méchant.
When this ceremony has been performed, I shall destroy you, John Burney.
The demons hate you, Rainer. They're waiting for you.
Catherine.
It's me! Don't!
La libération des mœurs explique sans doute qu'une photo de la jeune Nastasia Kinski nue ait été insérée dans le dossier de presse du film. Michael Carreras quitta la Hammer en 1979. Après son départ, son successeur, Roy Skeggs, parvint à sortir du marasme en produisant 2 séries télévisées à suspense.
I get asked time and time again in letters and interviews and things, when is Hammer going to return, or will Hammer return?
It's a shame. I think someone should really pick up the torch and run with it.
L'industrie du cinéma a radicalement changé depuis les années 50. Néanmoins, la Hammer continue d'inspirer un culte nostalgique à travers le monde.
They've often said, we grew up with you. You were like part of the family. We'd go on a Saturday and see these horror films and scream and yell. So we've always considered you part of us, which is wonderful.
Les publications destinées aux admirateurs de la Hammer, telles que la revue Little Shop of Horrors, éditée par Richard Clemenson, parlent des films comme s'il s'agissait de grands vins.
La profession rend aujourd'hui hommage à la Hammer.
La dernière scène du film Gremlins est directement inspirée du premier Dracula de la Hammer. Le réalisateur Joe Dante engagea d'ailleurs Christopher Lee dans Gremlins 2.
He said, but you have to remember, Christopher, that I and all my peers and all my colleagues, and there's a great many of them, Martin Scorsese, Brian De Palma, John Landis, Steven Spielberg, Joe Dante, and many, many others that don't come to mind at the moment. He said, we were brought up on your films when we were teenagers and young men. We were brought up on your films. We liked them, we loved them. And I'm naturally very grateful for that. It means they don't forget.
I'm not giving you bullshit. They were made by people who cared.
While we were doing them, we were dedicated to them.
I mean, as a matter of fact, as it worked out, it couldn't be better.
Those films will last forever.
Brocardés et critiqués au moment de leur sortie, ces films font aujourd'hui l'objet d'un culte. Le monde a fini par reconnaître la valeur de ces productions que Christopher Lee et Peter Cushing ont toujours défendues. Les longs métrages de la Hammer étaient d'excellente qualité.
We never thought it was going to be anything. And here it is. It's, you know, they're showing them at the Museum of Contemporary Art and the Lincoln Center, all those horror films.
It's in our blood. Film is in our blood.
Fun days.
Hammer was one of the happiest studios I've ever worked in my life. And it was a family.
Ces longs métrages présidèrent à l'élaboration d'un cinéma fantastique en Grande-Bretagne. Leurs images mêlaient amour torride et innocence, chair et sang, érotisme et épouvante.
Tous ceux qui ont participé à la création de cet univers imaginaire y ont trouvé une parcelle d'éternité. Quant à ceux qui ont découvert ces films dans les salles obscures ou sur le petit écran, ils peuvent les revoir comme on relit un conte de fées, avec la certitude qu'à la fin, le bien triomphera du mal.
En attendant, sait-on jamais, un prochain épisode.